We're going to be looking at the book of Lamentation here just a little bit this evening. Lamentation is, in fact, a lament for Jerusalem. When it says, "How lonely sits the city," there in verse 1, the city is Jerusalem. This is written by Jeremiah. Jeremiah writes the book of Jeremiah, but he also writes this lamentation for the destruction of Jerusalem. But let's look, and first off, what is a lament? A lament is an expression of sorrow, of great sorrow. It is that of grief or mourning, or it can even be that of regret. But it is a poem or as a song that expresses a loss, a deep loss. And he is expressing this city that used to be great, and it was great. This city that used to house the temple of God no longer did. That temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. And how great was this city, but not at this point in time. But we have to, let's go to 2 Samuel real quick and just look at another lament. This is 2 Samuel chapter 1, 2 Samuel 1, and this was at the death of Saul, King Saul, and Jonathan, that David writes this lament. In verse 17, "Then David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan. And he told them to teach the children of Judah the song of the bow. Indeed, it is written in the book of Jasher," which we don't have. It evidently is not a inspired book. It's just a book that existed in the days of David. And it goes like this, and it concerns that of Jonathan and Saul. "The beauty of Israel is slain on your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath. Proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. O mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew nor rain upon you, nor fields of offerings. For the shields of the mighty is cast away there, the shield of Saul not anointed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, and the sword of Saul did not return empty." And it continues on from there. Now, it is of note that David offers this lament, and he also wants it remembered. It's to be recorded and remembered. And David had a greater respect for the king of Israel than the king of Israel had respect for the king of Israel. Number one, David didn't kill Saul. Saul killed Saul. Number two, David was not about to harm Saul because Saul was king, but Saul wanted to kill David because he knew he was the next king. And understand, kings aren't voted in. They are anointed by God. If you, Saul, have a problem with David being the next king, you have a problem with God, not with David. David could not anoint himself, and he didn't. He was just a kid when he was anointed. He was just some boy taking care of his father's sheep when he's anointed by the same prophet, Samuel, that anointed Saul. And David gives this, creates this, writes this lament, this song of the bow for him. Now, let's go back to the discussion of the book of Lamentation. The book of Lamentation is a lament for Jerusalem. But we have to ask the question, why a lamentation? Why is there one? Why take any space in the Bible? You know, there is no lamentation for Sodom or Gomorrah. There's no lamentation in the book in the book of Genesis or anywhere for those cities. Those cities, as far as the text of the Bible, there's no lamentation for them, because those are different cities with different expectations. While, yes, Sodom and Gomorrah were wicked places, so was Jerusalem. But Jerusalem holds something else. In Jerusalem will have both great things being good things, and also wicked things coming right out of that city, coming right out of it. And there is a lament there. This happens to be one of those times when Jerusalem is facing punishment for the sins that have been committed inside of it. It is time to stop it. Now, we've talked about this every now and then, that there are times when corruption is so deep, that corruption is so great inside a culture, or in this case, a country of Judah, that the only way to stop it is with a very great force. That's the only way. It's like a reset button. That's the only way to do it. We can think of that concerning the world prior to the flood. There was only one way: that the innocent would not be slaughtered anymore. There's only one way: that the innocent would not be corrupted and become just as bad and worse as the generation before it. The only way was a flood. That was the only way. And the righteous are brought through that. And as we were speaking just this morning, into a world that would have been different from the world that they left. Very different. They would have been, when Noah and his family exit the ark, they are the world population right there. They are it. There is nobody else. Now, we come to Jerusalem. That Jerusalem is, as we said, let's go to Matthew chapter 23. Matthew 23, Jesus gives these words concerning, and this is also a lament toward Jerusalem. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who, so Matthew 23:37. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. Then he says, see, your house is left to you desolate. He is saying these words concerning Jerusalem, that there was great things that had occurred there, and there were terrible things that had occurred there. But we need to look once again, why is there a lament? And that's because of the great things that God had promised concerning Jerusalem. We'll get to that in just a second. Now, there was no great promises concerning Sodom or Gomorrah or for that world prior to the flood. That God is going to bring every promise through, and He doesn't need any of those places, or people, I should say, to bring it about. Jewish nation, He does. He doesn't need Sodom and Gomorrah to do these things. Or nothing extraordinary is going to be happening there. Those places are going to be destroyed, never to rise again. Jerusalem, however, is a different place. Now, let's talk about its past. Jerusalem is made the capital city of Israel. It's the place, it is the city for the kings, not by Saul. Saul was in Gilboa. That's where, Gibeah. Saul was in Gibeah. And David is the one that made Jerusalem home. And it becomes the capital city for Israel. Then we come to this. Let's go to 1 Kings. We come to this with 1 Kings, and we go to chapter 8. 1 Kings chapter 8, And once I get there, I thought I had marked it, but I haven't. And going to verse 12, Solomon builds the temple there. Solomon builds the temple. So we're in 1 Kings chapter 8, beginning of verse 12. Then Solomon spoke, "The Lord said he would dwell in the dark cloud. I have surely built you an exalted house and a place for you to dwell in forever." Here he has completed the temple, and we have that of the dedication of the temple that occurs in this chapter, and it would have been an extraordinary event. Just as it's described here is just extraordinary in the history of Jerusalem. This took place in Jerusalem because the temple is not only is it the home of kings, but it's also the place of the temple. The temple was put there, and that is where the temple would be. Now, come the days of Jeremiah, that temple's gone. It won't be until we get to the days of Ezra that they're building another one, and it's never going to have this kind of, opulence. What they build in the days of Ezra isn't going to have the opulence of this one, but that doesn't matter when you're worshiping God. We don't have to have things covered in gold, and we don't have to have gold implements and things like that. That it's just serving God as He wishes to be served. But here, Solomon has created this magnificent structure, and it would be considered, I don't think it is, but it would be considered one of the ancient wonders, though it wasn't huge. Like the pyramids are huge. It's not that big. But it would have been a lavish, extraordinary place, and it would have been seen for miles away. Jerusalem is on a mountain, and the temple would have clearly been seen from miles away. You have a clear view. You could see the temple from quite a ways. And but here, Jerusalem is the city with the temple of Jehovah in it. It is that city. Now, when we get to like John chapter 4, Jesus is speaking to the Samaritan woman, and she says, our fathers worship God on this mountain, but you Jews say in the temple in Jerusalem. You Jews say it's Jerusalem or that temple. Let's just go over there so we can, I don't have to try to get it all from memory. And the woman said, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers," verse 20, "our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where one ought to worship." Now, that is correct. What the Samaritans were doing was not according to the will of God. Not at all. They were not given authority to build a temple to Jehovah. They weren't given authority to do that. Nor were they given the authority to where they could have their own priesthood that mimics the Levitical priesthood. Because under the law of Moses, if you're going to be following the law of Moses, follow the law of Moses. And that requires direct descendants of Aaron to be priests. And, of course, they're not doing that. Nevertheless, this woman makes a distinction. She knows that it is said that in Jerusalem, that is where you worship God. That is correct. That's where the temple happened to be, placed there by Solomon and replaced there in the days of Ezra. Jerusalem was the city where Jehovah is the center of that city. He's the center of it. That is its past. That's its past. Now we can go further than that and to the days of Abraham, where you have Melchizedek. Melchizedek is a king and a priest of Salem, which would become, in the centuries afterwards, Jerusalem. But that's where Melchizedek was king and priest there. But let's go to Jeremiah chapter 2. Jeremiah chapter 2. And we'll see here in verse 13, this is its present. Jerusalem in its present condition. That is, in the days that when Lamentation is written, in those same days. Verse 13, Jeremiah 2, verse 13, this is God speaking, "For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me," that's God, "the fountain of living waters, and hewn themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water." Now, here in this rather poetic, metaphorical way, he talks about what they have done. That they, if you've ever seen an artesian well, you don't have, those are kind of rare, but you don't have to send a bucket down and lift the bucket back up. An artesian well is the water is constantly flowing out of it. It's flowing from under the ground. And of course it always has a stream that it's created. But an artesian well is where it's easy, much easier to get the water. You just get your jug or container or vase or whatever it is, and you just fill up with water and you go. It is offered constantly, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all year round. It is flowing. That's what it does. And he says, he compares himself to that of living waters. This is something always supplying living waters. But they've rejected that. They've hewn for themselves a cistern. Well, what's a cistern? A cistern is just something that catches rainwater. That's all it does. That's all it can do. It's just a trough or a bowl that big that you have it collects rainwater, and water from a cistern isn't near as good because it becomes stagnant. And it has things that'll grow in it. And an artesian well, that's not the case. It's always pushing out fresh water, always. And if there's no rain, that means there's no water in the cistern. It's not there. But he says, not only that, it's a broken cistern. It's not even holding the rainwater. It's useless. It can give you nothing. Nothing like God can. They've rejected him, and it's the same thing as rejecting living waters and just deciding, I'm going to get my water now from the cistern, and it's not really holding water, is it? That it holds nothing. It holds no water for them, so they are dying. Well, what does all this mean? It means they rejected God. They went on their own path. They were doing what they wanted to do, which offered no benefit to them at all. As a matter of fact, it was all a detriment to them. It was all harmful to them. They are dying spiritually, and they want to. They want to. Somehow they think that they can manage without God, and they cannot. Now, let's go to the book of Ezekiel, Ezekiel chapter 24. Ezekiel also describes this. It is God that is, in the book of Ezekiel, there are object lessons that occur in the book of Ezekiel, and there are also visions that occur in the book of Ezekiel. And in all of these, God is teaching something. He's teaching something. And Ezekiel chapter 24, and we'll begin in verse 1. "Again in the 9th year, in the 10th month, on the 10th day of the month, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, write down the name of the day, this very day. The king of Babylon started his siege against Jerusalem this very day, and utter a parable to the rebellious house, and say to them, Thus says the Lord God, put on a pot, set it on, and also pour water into it. Gather pieces of meat in it, every good piece, the thigh and the shoulder, fill it with choice cuts. Take the choice of the flock, Also pile fuel bones under it, make it boil well, and let the cuts simmer in it. All right, what does that mean? Here is this saying that God gives. And one could definitely call this a dark saying. A dark saying means mysterious. But what does this even mean? Well, he's going to explain it. He's going to explain it. Verse 6, therefore thus says the Lord God, woe to the bloody city, to the pot whose scum is in it, and whose scum is not gone from it. Bring it out piece by piece, on which no lot has fallen, for her blood is in her midst. She set it on top of a rock. She did not pour it on the ground to cover it with dust, that it may raise up fury and take vengeance. I have set her blood on top of the rock, that it may not be covered. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, woe to the bloody city. What is this? It's Jerusalem. It's Jerusalem. Just as Jeremiah described it, the people there having rejected God altogether, now, woe to the bloody city. I too will make a pyre great, heap on the wood, kindle the fire, cook the meat well, mix it in the spices, and let the cuts be burned up. Then set the pot empty on the coals, that it may become hot, and its bronze may burn, that its filthiness may be melted away, that its scum may be consumed. She has grown weary with lies. Think about this. Here is this city that is so corrupt. And he says she has grown weary with lies. That's a lot of lies. Just wearied themselves with it. Now, that doesn't mean going back to the truth because you're tired of the lies. It's just continuing on with the lie. Just continuing on. And her great scum has not gone from her. Let her scum be in the fire. In your filthiness is lewdness, because I have cleansed you, and you were not cleansed. You will not be cleansed of your filthiness anymore, till I have caused my fury to rest upon you. And then it continues on in this. This is its present condition. This is what God, and we could look at, we could look at this for several hours, actually, of God expressing through one prophet after another, of what He's going to do, and of the things that they are doing. That their hands are full of blood. That is because there's a lot of bloodshed that's been going on. Jerusalem, at this point in time, coming up to the days of Jeremiah, and into those days, obviously, and the days of Ezekiel, that there's a lot of crime that's going on. There's a lot of murder that's been going on. There are corrupt things, and they are taken over with idolatry of every sort. Matter of fact, in the book of Ezekiel, Ezekiel is given a tour by way of vision. Ezekiel actually is with the Babylonian captives we find him by the river Kibar. That's far away from Jerusalem. But he is given a tour by God of what's going on in the temple. And it is not good. While the temple still has the things that one would expect it to have, of the table of showbread and the incense and the altar and things like that. There's also other things that have been brought in that are being worshipped, and it's not worship to Jehovah at all. These are idols that have been brought in, things that are being worshipped right there in that temple. And so this city is a city of rebellious people. It is also a city in captivity, and it's a city that is currently being punished. A city that when the 70 years are completed, as Jeremiah said, when those 70 years are completed, they're going to be allowed to go home, not under the Babylonians. Babylonians will have been defeated by the Medes and the Persians. It's those kings who are going to allow Israel to go home, or the Jews to go home. if they so please. They're allowed to do that, and there will be a command for them to rebuild Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. Now, here is the thing. This is what separates Jerusalem from every other city on earth. Aside from everything else we have said, we have stated that there were terrible things that came out of Jerusalem. Terrible. They had some rotten kings. They had some good ones, not as many as rotten ones, but they had also a priesthood that became corrupted. They had their judges were being bribed, easily bribed. It seemed as though every facet of society was wicked. And not everybody was. We have a Jeremiah and an Ezekiel and a Daniel. We also have Daniel's friends that are mentioned, and there would be nameless ones who they were right before God. They were faithful, but we just don't know their names. But as far as the nation is concerned, from top to bottom, it was unsound. It was full of filth and every sort of wicked thing. Now, its future. Let's go to the book of Isaiah now. Isaiah chapter 2. And this makes the distinction between Jerusalem and every other city. And we'll just begin in verse 2. So it's Isaiah 2, verse 2. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. Okay, that's the first part of this. Something great is going to happen in the future. Now, in the days of Isaiah, Isaiah does not see the Babylonian captivity. He lives too far away for that to happen, as in time. He would have to live a very long life to see the Babylonian captivity. He lives in the days of Hezekiah. And it'll be quite a number of kings later. It'll be a number of kings later before we come to all of this. But in this, we have written, it shall come to pass in the latter days. What? The mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. All right, so verse 3, many people shall come and say, come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. So thus far, it's not really giving us any specifics except that something great is going to happen. It's called the mountain of the Lord's house. Where is that? I don't know. Don't know where it is. What is this? Where does this concern? I don't know, but all nations are going to flow to it. They're saying, come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. Then continuing on, he will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. Look at this. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. There is something powerful that's going to happen. And while the city is just laid low under the Babylonians, it's only 7-year captivity. And after that, they're going to be able to rebuild. Now, it's not going to be done overnight, the rebuilding. It's going to take years to do that. It takes years. It's going to take 2 or 3 generations for them to actually be involved in it, for them to make Jerusalem into what it, as close as to what it was in the past as they could. It never would be like it was in the past. Nevertheless, Jerusalem holds a future that is necessary for all of us, not just for the Jews, but for all of us, every single one of us. Let's just continue on. He shall judge between the nations and rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Okay, this sounds different. But he's not talking about the world. He's talking about the nations that flow into this mountain of the Lord's house. They are going to be the ones, those that flow there, they're going to be the ones that are going to take the swords and they're now going to be plowshares. They're going to, and that's just a farm implement. They're going to take their spears and it's going to be pruning hooks. Once again, a farm implement. It's not used for killing anymore. It's used for a much more practical purpose. Well, used for a farming purpose, which is very practical. Things are changed in this kingdom. This kingdom is this house, this Lord's house in the mountains. That is very, very different. And there will be a different people that are there. But they're coming from every nation. Yeah, they are. But inside the Lord's house, they're not lifting up sword against each other. And they learn war. They don't learn war anymore. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight. His kingdom's not of this world. But it is going to start out of Jerusalem. Now, it's not going to be ruled in Jerusalem ever. But it starts out of Jerusalem. Acts chapter 2, day of Pentecost in Jerusalem. That is where it starts. And this is exactly what was stated by Isaiah centuries beforehand. And we'll say this concerning Isaiah. It wasn't too long ago we were saying this about Daniel. The entire book of Isaiah, very ancient scroll, about 200 BC, is on display. The whole scroll is on display in Israel. It's taken from the Qumran caves. They're the Dead Sea Scrolls, as we would call them, on display. And the Hebrew can be read. Hebrew is still read today. The Hebrew can be read, and these words are in that scroll. How could anyone writing on that scroll at around 200, 250 BC be able to say such a thing? How could they do it? Well, they couldn't. But the fact of the matter is, the one who wrote that scroll that's in Jerusalem was not Isaiah. That's copied from earlier texts that were copied from Isaiah. And yet, there are the words. There are those words copied faithfully to where we can look back at the original language and see, yeah, it's all there. It's all complete. And here is this extraordinary thing telling us concerning the future of Jerusalem as it pertains to a kingdom that God is going to set up. And as Daniel tells us, it's under that fourth empire. In the vision given to Nebuchadnezzar, that fourth empire is Rome. He starts in that vision, Babylon, Medo-Persian, Greek, said specifically in the book of Daniel. And then the next one is Rome. And that is where this kingdom comes to be. But here is assurances from Isaiah that all this is going, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem, this is a prophecy. And this would tell those who wanted to listen. In the days of Jeremiah, in the days of Daniel, the days of Ezekiel, that Jerusalem would be returning. Now, we can see in Jeremiah specifically that Jerusalem would be returning. But here Isaiah speaks of it, that there is a promise yet to be. And it concerns Jerusalem, which means Jerusalem will return. that it will return in time, and of course it does. But let's go back to Lamentation. Let's go back to the book of Lamentations, and we'll go to just to chapter 2. Verse 1, how the Lord has covered the daughter of Zion with the cloud of his anger. He cast down from heaven to the earth the beauty of Israel and did not remember his footstool in the day of his anger. The Lord has swallowed up and has not pitied all the dwelling places of Jacob. He has thrown down in his wrath the strongholds of the daughter of Judah. He has brought them down to the ground. He has profaned the kingdom of its princes. Why would God do this? Because justice must be done. He's not going to give them warning after warning after warning after warning and just give them more warnings. There comes a time when, okay, you've had your opportunity. Since you prophet after prophet, you won't listen to them. You won't take any advice. You won't come, let us reason together, as God says in the book of Isaiah. Come and let us reason together. And they don't want to. They don't want to hear him. And there comes a point in time when God brings it about. And it should, here's an example of, God will do precisely what he said he was going to do. God will do exactly as he would do. And he's not weak, and he's not unjust. He cannot be bribed, and he doesn't change his mind. He has a power over all the earth. And if he can bring something like Jerusalem down with the temple and all that, he can do it to anybody, anytime. And we live in a place where if we were this nation where we are, if it were the cities were completely be destroyed, would there be a lament like this? No, there wouldn't be a lament like this. No, because that is specifically for Jerusalem and what it means to the world. Atlanta doesn't have that kind of meaning, and Nashville and Knoxville and any other city. San Francisco doesn't have that kind of a meaning at all. And if he is willing to do that to his chosen people, which is what Israel was, who are we? Who are we? Well, we are the wild olive trees. We're the wild olive branches that have been grafted into the domesticated ones in his olive grove. That's who we are. And brought there by the grace of God, by his love towards us. We need to look at our own lives. We need to make the adjustments we need to make to grow in faith and in faithfulness, to grow in our dedication to him. We ask, if you need to respond to the invitation, if we can help you in any way, we ask that you come as we stand and sing.